the estate tax could change drastically. So if that happens and you've now accumulated over that minimum, you could have a huge tax bomb for your heirs if you're not careful.
We've got Renee from Fayetteville. She says, I am 56, husband is 62, and we have $3.2 million in retirement savings. Good job. Not to brag, but I feel like we're in a pretty good spot compared to most I've heard about. My question is, at this rate, would the 4% rule be an okay strategy for us? If not, what should we do? Renee, thank you very much for your question. If you're planning to retire now, you're going to have a pretty long retirement at their younger ages here. And I can say that because I'm older than both of them. But being 56 and 62, having $3.2 million is a really pretty cool thing. The question is, all right, first of all, how do you deal with this long-term retirement that I mentioned? You could live into your 90s. That is 3 decades. And so you have to think about that issue. You also have to think about the fact that you are in a situation of saying, I wondered about the 4% rule, but let's talk about how much income you actually need. I think that's the key thing that most people really do kind of gloss over when they're talking about retirement. They do all this math equations, but they don't do the simple math of looking at their required and desired income.
Yes, and if they're looking at just a percentage, it can be misleading too, because when you think about those assets, all of us would agree over $3 million is a ton of money. However, if they need $10,000 a month to make their household work, then you're talking about a totally different mathematical equation. I think if you focus on the outcome you need, which is the income, then you have a better way of figuring out if those assets are sufficient. Another thing I noticed here is that she is 6 years younger. So in that case, Renee, there's a even better chance that you're going to have a period of time where you are a single person in retirement. So the question is, what happens when one of those Social Security checks goes away or whatever other resources you have? So it's important to think of it not just as one item, but to really see it in the big picture of your overall financial picture.
I think that one of the things that may be escaping Renee is the fact that the 4% rule does not provide for any guaranteed income. Now, we don't know whether Renee and her husband have a pension or not. We don't know whether how they will sequence Social Security, but likely Social Security is the only guaranteed income that they would have in retirement. And if that is not sufficient to meet their basic needs, then they're going to need to dedicate some of that $3.2 million towards some sort of way to produce guaranteed income to them to be sure that they get through the next 30 years of life with their fixed expenses taken care of by regular, dependable, predictable income. And I think that's the first step.
Yes, it takes a lot of pressure off of your other assets if you can take care of that piece first, if you can prioritize guaranteed income to cover those things that are coming anyway. Think back to 2020. Your light bill didn't go down just because you were stuck at home and possibly unemployed. You've got to make sure those things are covered no matter what's happening in the market. The other piece of this that I think is really important when you're getting to that level of wealth is, have you completed an estate plan? Especially if taxes change, as they may do here soon, the estate tax could change drastically. So if that happens and you've now accumulated over that minimum, you could have a huge tax bomb for your heirs if you're not careful.
Teresa, I think also there are expenses that people don't normally associate necessarily with retirement, but after they really start to dig into it and think about it, they do find out that there are these things that they need to take care of. One of them is long-term care expenses. If one or both of you have a need for some type of medical care that is not covered by Medicare or your Medicare supplement, it could be that you need long-term care coverage to offset that. Now you say, well, I've got $3.2 million. I've got a lot of cushion. Well, it depends on how much long-term care expenses you might have. So that's one issue in particular. I think the other issue is, what major expenditures are they likely to do over the next couple of decades? Could they want to buy a car? Do they want to take a lot of travel or something of that nature that may not be within the budget? Those expenditures can have a pretty big impact on the survivability of your overall retirement income plan. And I think that's where sitting down with a financial advisor and trying to do some forward thinking on this is probably appropriate.
Yes, I think looking at your current expenses is a great place to start, but you need to understand what might not be in your radar at the moment, which is something that we have special training in, is helping people identify those additional things. You think about that 4% rule. Let's pretend you only had $1 million. I know, only, right?
Right.
That's the goal a lot of people have. But let's say you had $1 million and we're in 2008. You're going to be in a situation where either you have to take a pretty substantial pay cut or you have to take an unreasonable amount out. So doing the math for you, in 2008, at one point, the market was down 40%. So you were taking $40,000 a year in income if you were taking the 4% rule as your way of doing this. But now that your portfolio is worth $600,000, you're either going to take $24,000 a year, a $16,000 discount, and cut and pay, or if you continue to take that 40, you've now taken over 7%, which is not sustainable. That's why having a strategy that is built to provide for your guaranteed income needs without worrying about the market is so impactful, in my opinion.
At GenWealth, it's called a flooring and bucketing strategy, or the ready to retire process. Basically, we provide for a significant level of guaranteed income to meet your basic living expenses. And then we do bucketing, or a time segmented strategy where we are laying out different dollars for different time segments in your retirement. If you take a look at the graphic, if you're watching the video portion of the Get Ready for the Future show, a couple of those buckets fall in the time frame of 1 to 10 years. That's where the most conservative money is. You're going to need that money fairly soon, so you don't need the vagaries of the market, the ups and downs of the market, to impact how much money you would have available. So we make those investments in very conservative investments. In the middle of the array of buckets, there is a moderate bucket where we are producing income in that bucket, but we're also giving some low-end growth to your portfolio as well. And then in the last couple of buckets are the growth buckets. Those are out 15 plus years. To tell you the truth, Teresa, the 15-year thing is almost magic, in that if you take a look at the history of the market, there's never been a 15-year period of time connected with the S&P 500 where you've had a negative return, meaning that if you just leave it alone, it's likely to have a positive return for you. The odds are all stacked in your favor if you do that, and that's why we segregate those equities to those long-term buckets.
And it was very helpful in 2020. Of course, I was not an advisor in 2008, so I didn't have to live through that trauma. But in 2020, when the market dipped so heavily in such a short period of time, the few clients that I did get calls from, I was able to reassure them, listen, your conservative bucket is okay. That's the one we're drawing from right now. We've got time for those others. But pretend you're in 2008 and you've got those later buckets. Well, there's the market since then. It's been right at 15 years. We're way ahead of where we were. You've had time to recover. Now, we can't guarantee market performance, of course. Our job is to mitigate it as best we can, and that's where this flooring and bucketing strategy can really be magical.